welcome to Goodknits. I'm Sheri. For those that are new here, I am a Canadian expat originally from Calgary, Alberta, and I've been living in Amsterdam for the last 7 years with my husband. So today is podcast episode 22, and it's been about 3 weeks since I filmed my last episode. And truth be told, I probably could have filmed about a week after that last one. I already had more than enough to say in terms of update. But now that it's been 3 weeks, I have made quite a lot of progress. I had 5 whips on my needles. The Stromboli tee has been officially retired or hibernated. It will come out next season. I have my 2 finished objects, so Micaela Sweater and Fancypepitaskirt. I have a really big update on my Freestyle shirt, which unfortunately I made a pretty big error on that one. And then my Braidy loop cardigan has seen some progress. And I also cast on my first official fall project yesterday. So I'm gonna throw that in here. Also at the end, I just wanna update you on kind of a spur of the moment purchase I made in terms of a knitting course and what my experience was. So if you're curious what that's about, stick around to the very end and I'll tell you about it then. A few quick updates before we get started with all the actually knitting updates. I had such great feedback on my latest wear test video, so thank you so much for watching that. I had said in that video that my Tulsta tee and my blouse number 2 were projects that I really wasn't that happy with, and I just wanted to give away for anybody that might want to use the yarn or actually just end up loving that project and keeping it as is. And I was really happy to see that so many of you really liked both of those projects and offered to take them. So they've now officially made their way to their new homes. Both actually ended up in California. I have seen pictures of their new knitters wearing them, and they look so much better than they ever did on me. So very, very happy that those have gone to new homes with people that will actually wear them and enjoy them more than I have. So I actually have quite a few projects in my closet that I am going to go through when I pull out all my fall clothes. And there may be some additional projects that I look at kind of offering up if people want the yarn or the garment itself. I'm kind of realizing, I have enough footage of me filming at this point through this channel. I have pictures of all these items. I don't necessarily need to hold on to them just for, sentimental sake. I tend to be a bit ruthless at times with cleaning out my closet and just giving clothes away. So I would much rather those pieces go, to places where they're actually going to get used in some form. So I do think I'm going to have a few other items to share with you all. I'm not really sure where to start today because there's just so much to say. I'm going to start with the Fancypepitaskirt, which was a test knit that I started back in April for Ann-Kathrin Stoll. This is a pattern that has recently been released in her Knits from Paris book. It's the only place that you can currently get it, unfortunately, and the book is only in German at the moment, but I do think they're planning to release an English version at some point. I was able to test knit the English version of this pattern. It did take me quite a while to finish, so it's now September. I started in April, but honestly, it's simply because I kept putting it down to work on other projects. So if I actually looked at the time of knitting for this one, it did not take me that long. So this is the Fancypepitaskirt, and it is this jacquard pattern panel that you knit front and back. So you do that first as its own piece. You block that and then you pick up stitches on the side panels, knit towards each other, join with a 3 needle bind off. That's the word I'm looking for. And then you do an I-cord hem that you just pick up stitches for, and then you knit the waistband. So you pick up the stitches for the waistband, you knit up, fold over, and the pattern on this one had called for pulling the elastic through at the end and then sewing it down. I opted to connect the waistband before and then just fold the waistband over it as I was going, and that worked very well. So I knit this in an extra small. One thing that I struggled with on this pattern is the measurements aren't super clear. So it doesn't say really how much negative ease you're meant to have. It doesn't tell you how big these jacquard panels should actually be when you block them. So the only thing you know is the length is meant to be 45 centimeters overall with all of these finishings done. And that basically you should try to stretch your panel widthwise as much as possible. So that was a little bit frustrating because I couldn't quite tell as I was working on this if I was actually at the correct measurements or like if I needed to adjust, because you can't really try this on when you just knit 2 panels and then you join on the sides. Like until these are joined, you have no idea how this is fitting. So I made the mistake of, I figured my panels felt narrower than they did in the pictures that she had, and she only actually had a few pictures of this, so it was quite hard to tell, but it felt like her panels went pretty much into the entire like sides of her hips. And for me, this is sitting much more in the middle with some additional fabric, or with these panels being very visible when wearing it from the front. So I was like, okay, I feel like to actually get to the correct size, like to fit a 95 centimeter hip, I'm going to need to add some additional fabric to the sides of this. She called for each side panel to be 7.5 centimeters roughly before you do the bind off. I calculated and opted to do about 9 centimeters, thinking, okay, well, that will give me enough space. That way, when I attach, it's not going to be too tight and I'll be able to move. So I did all my panels. I got to the sides. I seamed them together, tried it on, and it definitely fit. But it was clear that at the back, there was quite a lot of fabric that was, there was quite an excess of fabric at the back. And so I figured when I added my waistband, all that would end up happening was it would start to bunch and not really fit in the end. I decided to trust my gut on this one and rip back all the side panels. So I took out the bind off, I put in lifelines, I took out 7 rows per side. And in the end, that ended up being basically all the extra that I had added in. So I ended up basically at the 7.5 centimeters per side and then bound off. So it's maybe a lesson too of to just trust the pattern and what it says sometimes. If your measurements and your gauge are basically on, then maybe don't modify too much. So that was a good learning for me. I forgot to mention what yarn this is. So this is knit up in the Lana Grossa Land Lust Alpaca Merino 160. Yes, that's correct. It's quite the mouthful for a yarn name. And I knit it in color 405, which is this dark brown, and then 404, which is the lighter one. So I opted to do more of a tone-on-tone look here rather than traditional black and white for this jacquard pattern, because I figured it would be more versatile in my wardrobe. Really happy I did that, especially because this was my first color work project. So I wasn't sure, like the black and white might have made any mistakes too noticeable, and I wanted to give myself some room to have errors in this. I do think though I did a pretty good job of the pattern. I don't really notice any issues at all within this. So for my first color work project, I think my tension actually ended up being pretty good. Let me actually show you my floats here. This is the inside, and I actually think I did a pretty good job. So especially once blocked, it turned out quite nice. I didn't catch floats, because it was only, I think the longest was 7 stitches across. I was like, okay, well, since I'm wearing it on my bottom half, there's not really going to be anything to snag it while I'm wearing it, so I'm not going to worry about creating extra work for myself. I feel like it's a little bit bright here, so I'm just going to close the blinds. I don't know if that's that much better, but we'll see. So I forgot completely to measure this before I blocked it. I was just so happy to finally have it off my needles and excited to get a chance to wear it. I put it straight into the water and then realized after, oops, usually I would measure that. But I did measure at the end, and this is meant to be 45 centimeters long, but I am at about 50 centimeters long. But I'm not sure that actually matters, because what happens when you wear it is it does like stretch widthwise and then decrease lengthwise. So I do think it looks very close to the pattern photos for where it's supposed to sit on my thighs. And then I have no idea how much negative ease is supposed to be in this, like I said. So when I measure around the hips, it's about 72 centimeters, and it fits a hip width of about 95. So there's quite a lot of negative ease in this. Like I said before, it does fit me really well, so I'm not too worried. It was a bit of a pain, like hand sewing this waistband. I don't have a sewing machine at home, so I just had to use like a needle and thread. I didn't even have proper sewing thread, so I used DMC thread from my very brief stint in cross stitch. I really I used, I think, 5 threads and did a lot of sewing down, so hopefully that won't break on me. But I am a little bit worried. I know you're not supposed to use DMC thread. It also made me realize that I maybe want to invest in like a cheaper sewing machine. So I don't really, at this moment in time, I don't really want to get into sewing as a hobby on its own. But there are a few things like the waistband for this. I will also have the waistband for my staple skirt when I start that soon. And then, for example, I would love to make a pillow but have a fabric backing. I know some purses that you can knit, also you're supposed to have the fabric inside. So I'd like the option to make more of those accessories, even I think sewing zippers down. And I just don't really enjoy hand sewing. I'm thinking maybe I will invest in a cheap sewing machine. So if you also have any recommendations for something that would be under like 150 euros at most, ideally under 100, that won't be complete crap and will actually get me through most projects and work for quite a while, can you give me a recommendation? Because I sewed as a kid, but I really have no knowledge of sewing at this point. It's a new world to me. I have no idea what to buy. I just know the brands Brother and Singer, but maybe there's other new stuff that's come up. Some final thoughts on this. This is really not going to be a pattern that holds your hand while you're working on it. As a first color work project, it didn't really explain super well the whole idea of dominant yarn and non-dominant and how to catch your floats. There wasn't really that many helpful videos. I also ran into an issue at the end where with the bind off, it didn't actually say to bind off. So it was like, okay, sew down your waistband by picking up a stitch from the pickup line and then knitting 2 together, and you do that all the way around. But then I was doubting myself because it's been a while since I've done that kind of bind off. I'm like, I feel like I'm missing a step. And then I got to the end and realized, oh, I still have all these live stitches and no instruction for what to do with them. So I just ended up going back around doing a traditional bind off. That worked quite well. It doesn't add a lot of extra bulk, but that was missing. It's also something that had I finished this test knit on time, I probably would have caught and flagged. I don't think anybody else caught that when they were doing it. There was just like a few things like that where the pattern wasn't super clear on things, like with the measurements, how much negative ease are you supposed to have, how big are those panels supposed to be once you've blocked them. Those things would be nice to have. So just know that if you do go into this pattern, you should be somewhat comfortable or at least adventurous with figuring things out a little bit on your own. I also would recommend putting in a lifeline on your pickup edge so that when you go to sew down your waistband, you can actually tell where those stitches are. So similar to what My Favorite Things Knitwear recommends in the Cami number 9 folded hem. It was challenging with this brown yarn and kind of the color work section. It was very hard to tell where my pickup edge actually was. So I know I'm not 100% even on this, but I don't think it's super noticeable. So I'm hoping this will get a lot of wear. I am really excited to have a knitted skirt in my wardrobe. I love the colors of this. I think it fits me really well. There's not really anything I would change other than maybe making the elastic waistband a tiny bit bigger. I accidentally cut it a little bit too short. So it does feel tighter on the waist, but nothing that's like really uncomfortable for me. So yes, first finished object, Fancypepitaskirt. Definitely very happy with it. I almost forgot the most important part that I like to mention, which is the final price of my finished objects. So for the Fancypepitaskirt, I ended up needing 6 balls of the Lana Grossa yarn for a total cost of 59 euros and 45 cents. That included the shipping for the yarn. I did think I had quite a lot of the lighter brown left at the end, so I was thinking I only had actually used 1 ball of it, but it turns out I did go through about a quarter of the second ball. So I definitely needed the full 6 balls for this. You could easily bring this cost down by substituting a lower cost yarn. I think the Lana Grossa alpaca tends to be just a bit more expensive. 60 euros or so for this skirt. Honestly, for me, I still think if I bought a fall skirt in retail, I easily would have spent more than that unless the item was on sale. I'm not upset about the price. I think I will get a lot of wear out of it. Very happy with it. And I also think this is an item that will carry through my wardrobe for many years to come. Jacquard pattern is very easy to wear. It's very timeless. So yeah, that was the final cost of that project. Obviously the pattern was free because I was a test knitter. Finished object number 2 is my Micaela sweater. And this is a pattern by Moreca Knits, and I finished it actually yesterday. So I was originally going to film this podcast episode on Saturday. It's now Sunday, and I figured I'm so close. I just need to finish the neckline, so I'm going to give it a day, and I will film once I actually have this done. I'm going to pop this, actually, no. Let's talk about a few things first, and then I will pop it on and show it to you. So I knit this in a size small on the Filcolana Tilia, which is a mohair. It is color Antique Rose or 373. And this is 70% kid mohair, 30% silk. I had originally bought this mohair for my Ppoppo jacket and then ended up finding the color wasn't exactly right. So I decided to wait and see when I had a better project for it. And I wanted to do a spur of the moment cast on when we were going to Munich in August for Adele. So I cast this on August 9th and I cast it off September 21st. And the only reason that this took me a little bit longer to knit was because I actually ran out of yarn. So I had 6 balls of it originally, and the pattern called for 7. I was hoping I could make it work with just the 6 that I had. Unfortunately, that wasn't possible. So I actually got gifted this extra yarn from a lovely viewer, Kasia, from Poland, and she said she had some leftover from one of her projects. I'm not sure what she knit. She sent me 2.5 balls of it. I ended up needing almost an entire 7th ball of this, so thankfully I got that from her. And I was a bit worried that the color would be different, but by some miracle, she actually had the exact same dye lot. So dye lot 56, all her balls were exactly that, so it was perfect. It could not have worked out better. And now I have extra yarn of this that I can use for another project. And I actually have some, it's tucked away in the back corner there, so I'm not going to try to pull it out. But I actually have some Olivia and Oliver merino that I bought last year and never got around to using. And it would be a perfect fit with this. So I'm hoping I can make a headband, maybe some gloves, or maybe a little tiny scarf for a nice little accessory. What do I have to say about this? So I've talked about the construction and that in previous videos. I'm not going to go into too much detail. What I will say is on the sleeves, I originally knit them to pattern, which was once I finished the decreases, I got to the length mentioned in the pattern. I wasn't totally happy with the length. It seemed like it was going to be too short. So I ended up adding an additional 10 rows to this, which would have been the equivalent of doing another round of decreases, but I did no decreases in it. And then I did the ribbing. And I was a little bit worried once I started to block it that the sleeve was going to be way too long, because pre-blocked it was 41 centimeters, and as I was laying it out, it stretched to 49. The final length right now is 48, and I think they're actually perfect. They go to about here on my hand, which I actually really enjoy that length, and I wanted them to be a little bit looser. I was hoping that during blocking, some of my shoulder shaping would, or arm shaping, I guess, would end up getting a little bit cleaner, but that didn't happen. So I have noticed that when I knit only with mohair, I tend to not have the cleanest knitting. So with most of my other pieces, I do feel like my knitting is quite polished and my increases usually look very clean. But with mohair, that doesn't happen. So in her pattern photos, like this whole pickup of the arm, I think looks very polished. And for some reason, I feel like I have some like spacing that's happening there. Because what you do on the arms is you pick up and then you do German short rows back and forth to shape that first bit around these seams, which is really nice. I like German short rows on sleeve shaping. But I think maybe I just didn't pull it tight enough. I'm not really sure, but that kind of bothers me. Okay, I wanted to show you that, and now I'm going to pop it on so that I can really talk about it and you can see the neckline shaping a bit more. Wearing this, let me back up a little bit. Here, well, pretend that the microphone isn't there. So sleeve length is pretty good. I quite like the ease on this, and I ended up cropping the length by about 2 centimeters. But where I'm kind of having an issue on this is the neckline. So I really, really like how Moreca Knit does her necklines. I think it's a really interesting construction. I won't get into all the details because you should buy the pattern. But essentially, you pick up on a larger needle size than what you knit with for the rest of the sweater. You add in a contrast color to do that pickup round so that you can see where you initially started. Then you knit your collar, you do some double knitting to aid with this fold over part, similar to the weekend hat. And then you fold it down and you graft. You stitch your live stitches to your pickup edge. And the contrast color helps because you can easily see where you need to pick up those purl bumps. That was perfect. It was probably the most seamless pickup that I've ever done. But what I'm having an issue with is I don't love the way that this collar is sitting on me. And I do think it looks pretty similar to the pattern photos. I actually ended up picking up less stitches than were called for, simply because I got to the end and realized I was about 6 stitches short, which was the same as the extra small size, not the small. But it felt like it was really wide before I started. So I'm like, it's probably not going to be a big deal. I'm just going to go with it. And I'm glad that I did, because I think it would have been even wider if I'd picked up the correct amount. And it just feels a little bit thick. So I'm gonna try threading some elastic in and see if that helps cinch things up a little bit. But I'm just finding that the way that this collar looks, it's kind of throwing off the rest of the sweater for me. So I love the color. I like the overall fit. I also love the details. So you do kind of a saddle shoulder here. You have your shaping with your German short rows. It's a super, super nice construction, beautiful sweater design. I also really loved how clear the pattern was. But I don't know. There's something about it in the end that just is kind of throwing me off. So I'm gonna add in that elastic, see if it changes the way I feel. And then I think I just need to see if I wear it right. So I do think I will be able to pair it with my skirt and it will be a really nice color combo. So I'm just gonna give it a try, see how things go. Worst case, maybe I take the neckline out and do something else, maybe not fold it over. But I think I've noticed this in general. Also my Oslo sweater, just that folded collar and rib, it always feels a little bit plump. And I don't necessarily like the look of a non-folded collar when it's just straight ribbing and then you bind off, but I like that it lays a little bit flatter. One thing I do really like though also about this neckline is you end up having this pearl ridge to start. So it does just look really, really clean. Like it is a construction that I would use in other projects that maybe aren't as detailed. And it was also a good example of, again, trusting the pattern and the process, because when I picked up the stitches on the larger needle size, I was looking at it and was like, oh no, I mean, this feels so wide with the way the contrast color was showing in it. I'm like, this is gonna look so sloppy in the end. Should I just rip it out and do it all over again? But I decided I was gonna keep going, see how it looked in the end, and worst case, I would take the whole thing out and start over. Like the second I started to sew down the collar, it really, I don't know, ended up somehow tightening up those bigger stitches. So yeah, I think with her patterns, I would just trust the process of how she writes it and the instructions that she gives. It is going to look clean in the end. And I think somebody else had said that before in one of the comments on, I think my fall knitting plans video, no, my last podcast, that she really pays a lot of attention to the details and her construction is like as beautiful on the outside as it is on the inside for that. And I can see that now. It's really, really nice. I just need to find a way for this color to look better on me specifically. Also, as nice as it was to pick up the color in the contrast color and then be able to see those pearl bumps, it also made for a bit of a pain of an extra step to actually take that yarn out, because you end up knitting it into your first round. So it's not just as simple of like, okay, untie whatever knot you maybe had and then pull the yarn out. You really need to go pick it out off of your needles before you do the complete bind off. So that was a little bit of a pain. It didn't take me that much longer, but I think it was worth that extra effort to be able to easily just pick up the pearl bump and know that you were on the same row the whole way around. So this is the Micaela sweater. It's one that I need to just sit with a little bit longer and then share my final thoughts. There's a lot to love about this, but there's a lot that I'm just, well, not a lot. There's just a few details that I am not 100% feeling yet, but let me report back once I've had a chance to really wear it. So yes, Micaela sweater. The final blocked measurements of this, so I said the sleeves ended up being 48 centimeters. The positive ease is pretty on pattern, so I ended up around the 106 centimeters, which my measurements will be in the description. And I knit the body 2 centimeters shorter than the pattern called for, so my final length is around 51 centimeters, which I'm very happy with. I think it sits at the perfect place, knowing I'm mostly going to do a French tuck, so I didn't want it too long. And then the final cost for this, I paid for 6 balls of the Filcolana Tilia, which was with shipping 54 euros and 45 cents. And then I was kindly gifted the additional ball of yarn. So even then, this pattern would have ended up costing me around 60 euros for an entirely mohair sweater. I think that's a great price. For me, kind of anytime that I spend below 100 euros on a sweater, I think that that's a win. Yeah, 60 euros for a sweater, great price. And thank you again, Kasia, for the extra yarn. You really saved me on that. I also realized I completely forgot to say at the start of the episode what I am wearing. So this is the Sonia shirt by Susanne Müller, and I made it this summer. If you want to hear all my thoughts on it, go watch my latest wear test video. I tell you everything, how I'm feeling, but yeah, love this piece, and that's what I'm wearing. Like covered in mohair now. I feel like as I've been working on that sweater, I've just had so much mohair in my eyelashes, on my lips, everywhere. Okay, let's get into the really big whip update, because this happened 2 weeks ago. That's why I said I could have just filmed an episode on this, and I wish that I had, so I didn't have so much to talk about today. But so my next whip is my Freestyle shirt by Susanne Müller, so same designer as the shirt that I'm wearing. And this is a raglan t-shirt that I started at the end of August for our trip to London, also to have a spur of the moment cast on. Full disclosure, I did not gauge swatch for this. That will become important in a second. And yeah, I am using the Kremka Soul Wool Morning Salutation, which is a vegan yarn, and it is 51% tencel, 49% cotton. So I am knitting this in a size small on 3.5mm needles, and everything was going very, very smoothly. I was making a ton of progress. Last episode was, I had just joined under the arm, so I was just able to try it on. So you can see I've made a lot of progress. I basically knit this entire amount since the last episode, and I was getting close to finishing the body. And I was sitting there knitting on a Saturday night, I think at like 11 o'clock p.m. And I was like, I feel like I am not going to have enough yarn for this project. So I was just finishing my 5th ball. I double checked my receipt from the yarn that I ordered. I only had 6 balls that I ordered, and I'm like, okay, I still have quite a lot to go on the body, and I haven't even started the sleeves or the neckline. So maybe I'm going into my 5th ball and I have a 6th ball somewhere and I just can't find it. So I looked around the house, realized, no, I was definitely holding my 6th ball and I was just about to dig into it. So I'm like, how is that possible? I double checked the pattern. I had enough yarn. I had bought exactly what was listed for my size. And then I remembered when I was filling out my Ravelry for this and inputting my yarn, I looked up Kremka Soul Wool Morning Salutation, and I remember 2 options coming up. And I was like, well, that's weird. So I picked the one that I had, Morning Salutation, and I didn't really give it another thought, and I kept going. So I decided, let me go double check the pattern page and click on the link for the actual yarn. And I opened it and I'm like, oh, it says that the yarn should be 165 meters per 50 grams. And also this is color 14 olive. And my yarn is 110 meters for 50 grams. So there's definitely something wrong there. And that's when I realized that there is a lino or fino version of this yarn, which is the fingering weight version of this DK weight yarn. So this pattern was meant to be knit in a fingering weight, and I have been knitting it in DK. And I think it just threw me off because, of course, lots of brands do this, right? Like Sadness Garn has their tin and tick versions of their main yarn, so the lighter or thicker weight. And I just have never worked with Kremka Soul Wool, so I had no idea to even look for that. And this yarn was already quite hard to find for me. So I just looked up Morning Salutation thinking that was the yarn and didn't give it a second thought, bought it. only to now realize that there is a lighter and heavier weight version of it. So you're probably thinking, well, you would have figured this out if you had actually done a gauge swatch at the beginning and measured it. And you're right, I would have figured that out. And I just really needed a project to work on vacation. I didn't want to go through the hassle of gauge swatching. I was like, on other projects I've done from her, my gauge has been fine. So I'm just going to go ahead. I'm using the suggested yarn. It probably won't be that off. So yeah, I, before filming this, have now measured my gauge, and honestly, it's not super off, but once this is blocked, it will be. So my current gauge is 25 stitches by 32 rows, and the pattern calls for 24 by 32 or 33. So like really, I'm not super far off, but I'm gonna pop this on and show you why I don't think I can make this work right now. So 1 second. Okay, so let's do a try on here. So when I tried it on last episode, I had just joined under the arms. I felt like, you know, where these raglans were sitting, everything was looking good. And for the most part, I think I could potentially get away with keeping this as is and just continuing to knit, but this is already quite wide here. And the biggest issue I'm having is where this underarm is sitting. So the second I raise my arm, like my armpit is here, and the armhole is all the way down here. So it's just too wide and deep for my liking. Maybe this is a better example without the needles. So I'm just not sure that this is worth continuing to knit, especially knowing that I need to buy more of this yarn if I were to keep going. I probably need at least another ball or two. So that's a shame, but it's also a really good reminder that gauge swatching is really important. And I've just gotten into a really bad habit lately of not doing it because I just want that initial kind of hit of being able to work on something. And because I've been casting stuff on very last minute, spur of the moment, I'm not properly planning things. And then I don't want to be knitting stuff that I'm not happy with in the end. So thankfully the Micaela sweater worked out. The gauge is pretty much exactly right on that, even though I didn't gauge swatch. But on this one, it is a little bit of a failure because I know I'm not going to get any wear out of this at this point. Yeah, this is not going to be really a fall knit for me. I think I'm just going to put it aside as is. So I'll put it on some try-on tubing and then wait and see, do I want to frog back maybe to like, I don't know, up here somewhere, reduce the amount of increases, and then that would help shrink it. The problem is I would still have to buy more yarn in the end. So I don't know. Do I frog it completely and restart it as a DK weight project and I adjust my needle size and maybe the size that I'm casting on so that it works a little bit better, or just again change the amount of increases? Or do I just give up on this, use this yarn for something else that's actually a DK weight pattern, and then hopefully the 6 balls that I have would be enough? Maybe a tank top or something. So I don't know. What do you guys think? Is there kind of any easy salvage for this? I'm also worried putting in a lifeline and picking up stitches. I am not quite sure how to do it with this pearl raglan, and so I'm not sure it's going to look as clean, and I'll probably end up making a mistake up there. I think similar to my Stromboli tee, which I stopped working on simply because we're going into fall and I don't need that piece, I think this is going to be similar. I'm just going to put it aside, hibernate it for now, really think through, is this still a piece that I want? If so, can I salvage it in its current state? If not, what am I going to do? Is it, you know, remake it in this yarn with DK, or pick a different pattern and do something else. So let me know your thoughts. I was so mad at myself for not reading the label and then not gauge swatching, because yeah, I guess I got the enjoyment of knitting it. This was fun. It served its purpose. And actually, a viewer mentioned on my fall knitting plans video when I was talking about the book club cardigan and how I wanted the process of that knit, but not necessarily the final object. She said her trick is sometimes she'll just cast on a project that she knows she doesn't want in the end, but she just wants the fun of knitting it or learning a new skill. She'll knit it until she feels happy that she got that, and then rip it out and use the yarn for something else. Maybe I can view it in that light. I got the enjoyment of knitting it. I saw how kind of the pearl raglan looks. I really like that detail. I got to use a new yarn. That was fun. So yeah, I'm not going to look at it as a completely negative experience, but it's unfortunate. It's been a while, I think, since I've had a project really not work out, but better to recognize it at this stage and just not keep going, because I was just going to power through and be like, it'll be fine in the end. But I'm not happy with where it's at right now, and so I don't want to spend time, especially when I have so much on my fall knitting plans and I am feeling so much excitement for knitting right now. I want to cast on so much stuff, and now that my whip pile is back down to a manageable amount, I'm feeling a lot of energy for knitting, so I'm ready to move on. That's the update on my freestyle shirt. It's unfortunate, it happens. And it's a good lesson. Always remember, gauge swatch. I've said it many times, but I mean it. Gauge swatch. It's very important. Okay, let me change back and then we will go through the final two whips. Moving on to the Braidy loop cardigan by Other Loops. And I feel like cardigans are a little bit hard to share. I am knitting this also in a size small, and this has been on my needles for quite a while. Last episode, I was just starting the rib, so I have now finished the rib bottom, which was about 8 centimeters, and I have moved on to the sleeve, which I procrastinated doing for quite a while because I just, for some reason, was nervous about getting back into this cable pattern on the sleeve. I was like, I don't remember how to do it and like how you're supposed to work the cable with the decreases for the sleeve. So I, kept kind of putting it off. And then finally one day was like, okay, I just need to sit down and work on this and then kind of give myself, one round of decreases or one cable repeat every couple days to make some progress. So this is about a week of work, not exclusively. And I have done 7 of the 12 decreases for my size, I think. I have 15 centimeters left before starting the ribbing. So this is going to take a while. And then I'm finding it really, really hard on my hands to knit this for some reason, like especially with the cables and just the small circumference. I really can't do that much in one sitting. So at most, I'll usually get through 2 rounds of decreases and then I need to put it aside. I'm also struggling with working on this because I know once I'm done this sleeve, I have a whole other sleeve, and then I have the button band, which is making me nervous because it's brand new to me. I've never done that before. So I don't know. I really want this piece, but I'm finding that it's scaring me a little bit more than it's making me excited in terms of the construction. So I do keep just kind of putting it aside and then having to talk myself into working on it. But I do want to finish this soon, so I'm going to try to prioritize it. Let me throw it on. The arm's actually a bit further than I thought. And I think this fabric is going to really bloom. I'm also knitting it in the Assayer Jensen yarn in color 2S. It doesn't look like much here, paired with the Assayer mohair also in 2S. It is a little bit of a lighter, cooler, like cooler in color fabric than I would like. I think it's gonna be a really nice piece. I'm very excited to have in my wardrobe. I really need this cardigan. It's definitely on the heavier side. I think this is worsted weight in the end. I'm also thinking I will finish this sleeve, then move on to the button band, and then go do the final sleeve. I think that will help build some confidence and make me feel like I'm making a bit more progress, because I'm worried if I finish the second sleeve first, then I will just procrastinate forever on doing the button band. So maybe doing it in that order will kind of push me towards the finish line. All I really have to say on the Braidy loop, this has been a whip for a while, so you guys have seen it quite a bit. It's definitely getting carried into my fall knitting plans, but at this point, if I frog the freestyle, this is actually my only previous summer knit that is actually carrying into fall now, since I finished those other two projects. And yesterday, I think, was the first official day of fall, so perfect timing. And then I actually have a brand new whip to share today, which just got cast on yesterday. And that is finally the start of my Ppoppo jacket. So I've been talking about this since April or May. And we had the whole yarn fiasco of trying to find the right mohair to pair with this Lana Gatto VIP I bought in Vilnius when I went to Lithuania. And it's 80% Lana Merino extra fine and 20% cashmere. So it's actually my first time working with cashmere. And then it's the Assayer silk mohair, which is 75% kid mohair, 25% silk in the color 69. And yeah, I think they're a beautiful pairing together, and they're working up so nice. So this cardigan is worked from, this is kind of the back triangle, and you work down. So I just finished all the increases. It is in double moss stitch. I'm making it in size 1. And reading this pattern, so I think similar to what I said about Ann-Kathrin Stoll, this is not going to be a pattern that really guides you and holds your hand. I really got stuck on the increases because I would kind of expect, I would expect it to say, you know, keep working the past 4 rounds until you have X number of repeats done. But it's kind of just like, keep working increases until 13 rounds have been done. But what they mean is 13 increases on each side, because at the end of each row, you cast on new stitches. Because you're working flat, it's like you cast on at one side, then you work your way back, you cast on that side. So what the pattern meant was you actually need to do it 26 times back and forth to then achieve the correct number of stitches. So thankfully the pattern said you should have this amount of stitches on your needle at the end. Otherwise I would have done the amount of increases that I thought and then kept going. So that was a little bit confusing. And then I can already tell reading down that it's similar in terms of you're going to need to sort of decipher what is happening and making sure that you're keeping the double moss stitch going. So I think once the increases are done, that will be a little bit easier to maintain, because it was challenging to memorize the 4 pattern repeat in terms of right side and wrong side, because you're constantly switching every 2 rows and you're working right side and then wrong side. But I did it. I don't think I have any mistakes in here. Yeah, and I think this is going to be a really beautiful color. I actually bought a t-shirt in this color recently too, and the colors are working really, really nicely together. So happy that I made that decision to switch and just go with a darker mohair. So 1 day's worth of progress. I think this is going to be my Sunday knit today to just enjoy and make some progress on, and it's on 5.5mm needles, so it's going to go pretty fast. The pattern does call for 6mm needles, but I gauge swatched for this in the summer when I was planning to use a different mohair, and I already had too many stitches on my needle, and that was pre-blocking. So I decided to just go down to 5.5 because this is already a really oversized fit. I'm not too concerned about being exactly to pattern measurement. I already think the size 1 on me is going to be quite oversized compared to what I'm used to. So yes, I'm not going against the advice that I just gave. I did gauge swatch to some degree on this. I just don't want to gauge swatch again because I feel pretty confident on the 5.5. And one frustrating thing about this pattern for me, well, not the pattern, the process of knitting it, is I do not have 5.5mm for my ChiaoGoo needles. I only have it for my Aegyoknits, which is the original interchangeable needles that I was working with. And these were nice needles because you just click in the needle tip as opposed to having to screw it in, and therefore it also doesn't really come undone. But I'm reminded of like, oh, I hate the cables on these things. So they're just these curly, wiry messes of cables, and then they twist as you're working on them. So I'm really not enjoying going back to these after working on the ChiaoGoos for the last year. But I don't want to invest in 5.5mm needles for my ChiaoGoos right now, because then I would need to buy not only the needle tips, but also the cables to go with them, because the cable for that size of needle tip is the large cable. You can't use the small ones like the rest of the smaller needle sizes. And then I think I would have to buy a few different options to be able to knit this pattern. So I'm just gonna keep on this Aegyoknit set and hope it goes fine. And then if I need to knit anything else in the future on 5.5 or 6, then I will maybe invest in the bigger needle sizes for what I need. But right now I don't think it makes sense. I feel like I've been talking forever. My voice feels very hoarse. I'm so sorry if this is a really long episode. I'm gonna try to cut out as much as I can. I don't really have much in terms of acquisitions to share, but I do have one small one, and then next episode I will have some new yarn. So I did an order from Hand Dyed Harmony, which is a notions and stitch marker company out of Finland. Owner is Anu, and she had kindly gifted me previously stitch markers, but I really loved her stuff, and so I wanted to go make a purchase on my own. These are not gifted items, and I decided to buy the cute little pumpkin progress keeper with these stitch markers. So yeah, I thought this was adorable for fall. And then I also got these cute little sweater stitch stoppers, needle stoppers, an adorable little macaron notions tin. And then she also surprised me with a cute little unicorn, which honestly, I was obsessed with unicorns as a kid, so that made me very happy to see. I'm gonna also say you don't need these kind of knitting accessories to knit and enjoy the process, but especially because I don't tend to buy yarn unless I have a project for it, and therefore I don't get that thrill all the time of buying knitting stuff. I personally get the enjoyment from getting little accessories for myself. I like having a lot of stitch markers also so that when I send people, you know, for example, the Tolsta and the blouse, I threw in little stitch markers. So I like to have them on hand so that if I ship something out to another knitter, I can also just include something. And it brings me a lot of joy seeing these kind of items on my projects. So you don't need them, but if you enjoy it, and especially if you don't buy a lot of yarn for yourself, I think it's a nice, small, fairly inexpensive type of item to treat yourself with and just get that little, hit of knitting joy. I was going to talk about knitting plans here, but I think this episode is already going on long enough, so I think I'm going to save that for a future episode. All I will say is I have yarn coming for my staple skirt. So that will be the next cast on that I do. I'll share more on that in the next episode. So I mentioned at the start of the episode that I ended up buying a spur of the moment class, and I really mean that as a spur of the moment. So I woke up one morning a few weeks ago, I saw an Instagram ad for a Learn Tech Editing knitting course run by Cool Wool. That's really difficult to say. Cool Wool School, whose owner is Carol Ibbotson. She's based out of the UK. I didn't know any of this. I just saw, oh, Learn Tech Editing. It was £37 for the class. It was starting, I think, a week from then. And I was like, oh, that could be interesting. I would like to learn a little bit more about tech editing and how patterns are graded and what that means. So I was like, it seems like a fairly low cost investment to gain some additional knowledge. So literally I was laying in bed, saw this ad, clicked purchase, and bought it. And I'm really glad that I did, because this class was this class was meant as an intro to her much bigger tech editing course. And it was run over a series of 5 days, so Monday to Friday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Central Time for Europe. And each day she would have a topic that she would go through. So the first day we went through checking that stitch counts were correct. The second day we took the gauge and also stitches in the pattern to help determine if lengths and widths were correct. And then there was a day where we went through, and I missed this class, I still need to go back and watch the recording, but going through a real tech edit with a real pattern, and then she gives you homework and quizzes. So I thought that was really interesting. I'm not sure that I necessarily want to go on and have a career as a tech editor, but I found that it's something that I struggle with, reading patterns, to be like, okay, you know, how long is something supposed to be, or how do I modify a pattern to better fit me and my measurements? I've never really felt confident with the whole math side of knitting. And I figured if I took this class, it would at least give me more of like the background and foundation of how patterns are created for different sizes and what that could mean for me if I have no desire to design my own patterns, so that's not where we're going with this. But just as a way to have a foundation for if I want to start to modify things a bit more based on, okay, I have all this knitting knowledge now, I've made lots of different patterns for myself, but I want to get more comfortable with changing things and trying things for me. And also maybe, yeah, with this GK weight yarn from my Freestyle shirt, being more comfortable with modifying that yarn for a pattern that calls for fingering, which also Patty Lyon's book, Knitting Bag of Tricks, also goes through this kind of stuff. So that's also a great starter if you don't want to do a class. And it's a book that I need to dig into a bit more as well to go back to that section. This kind of intro course was really nice, 5 days, low commitment. There was video recordings that you could watch. Carol has been tech editing, I think she said, for 15, 20 years. She has worked for all kinds of big yarn brands and designers. And it was just a really, really nice way to kind of dip your toe in and see if also maybe you have an interest in becoming a tech editor or maybe even a designer, and this gives you a bit of a foundation for that. So interesting course. I still need to go back and kind of rewatch some of the videos or do the example test tech edit. I'm not ready to jump in and do the full course. That was kind of at the end, like, okay, who's ready to jump in and do the self-guided one or the kind of full-time with a class? I'm not at that point. I am not looking for that additional career right now, but nice to know that that is an option. And I think she was saying that there's actually not enough tech editors and there is quite a lot of work. So if you've ever given that some thought and you were wondering, how do you become a tech editor and what does that mean? I'll include all the details. It's not a sponsored link or anything. It's just something that I did for fun. So I'll include all the details in the show notes so that you can go check that out and see if maybe there's a fit. I think the next tech edit intro class doesn't happen till February, but there's also a crochet one that she does, and the full tech edit course is starting, I think soon, I think in October. So yes, very random knitting purchase that I had no expectation of buying for myself, but was fun, glad that I did it. Okay, my voice is dry. I'm very tired of talking, so I am going to wrap it up here. I will probably have a lot to say in the next few weeks, so I'm going to try to film my next podcast episode sooner. If you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to give me a thumbs up, leave a comment. I always really enjoy having conversations with you guys there. And as always, please don't forget to subscribe and turn on bell notifications so you are alerted to all my upcoming episodes. I post podcast episodes roughly every 2 to 3 weeks and sprinkle in additional content here and there as I have things to say. So I hope you'll stick around, and thank you so much for being here. I'll see you in the next episode.